What's up out there? It is time to share my final thoughts on Last Epoch version 1.0. I'm sure there's going to be more videos in the future as they release more content and do more things, but I wanted to put together my final thoughts on the 1.0 release of the game. I've done a few videos here and there talking about, review in progress kind of things, but this is going to sum up everything. This may sound overly critical at various points in time, but it's because I really like this game and I want to see this game improve. I thought about doing this for, say, something like Diablo 4, but I don't think anybody's going to listen or care about making any changes or significant improvements to that game. In this game, the developers are very responsive. They listen to the community. And a lot of the things, I've watched some other people's videos talking about their reviews. A lot of things are probably going to echo similar sentiments, but I have my own quirks with this game and my own thoughts about certain things. And I've also gone back and I've taken a week off deliberately of not playing. I got a little bored in the monolith section, but I took a week off and went and played the original Diablo. I've been playing Path of Exile again. I kind of just moved on to some other games to try to get away from this and come back to it and see how much those thoughts kept with me. You know what I mean? And I will be comparing this to other similar games like the Diablo franchise, Grim Dawn, Wolcen, Path of Exile, the usual suspects. So let's dive in. So the first section that I want to cover in here is just the general systems, like offline mode, for instance. The very first thing we ran into when this game released into full launch was the fact that there was, 8 or 10 times the amount of people that tried to get in. So the online mode was broken right off the bat. I gave it a shot. The first day I was able to sort of play and then it sort of wasn't working. The biggest thing that this game has going for it, and this is very similar to the way Wolcen launched, is that it's got an offline mode, and regardless of all the online issues, you could go offline and play it. The cool thing with this one, compared to, say, Path of Exile is online only, so if you have any issues with any of the infrastructure that goes on, you can't play, period. With Wolcen, we had online issues back when that launched, but you could play offline. The big difference between Wolcen, though, is Wolcen had a very bad launch. Not only was it hard to play online, like there was a lot of people wanting to play. Believe it or not, a lot of people love ARPGs, games styled like this, and we constantly look for the next big thing. It's not because it's a competition or anything. We just love this style of game, and there's very few of them. The fact that I can only name off like half a dozen of these kind of games, I know there's some other ones that I haven't played, but the fact that I can only name off half a dozen in 30 years' time that are still relevant to this day speaks volumes. It's not like we get a yearly Call of Duty. It's not like the yearly Call of Duty installment where you just pick which one you liked or whatever. There's not very many of these kinds of games out there. So they're very memorable. And like you're going to see a problem like with Wolcen. It had a massive launch. It had a lot of expectations. But the problem was the game behind it all wasn't that good. I mean, I liked the game, but it was super buggy. I had a really cool campaign and all that good stuff with it, but it was super buggy. With Last Epoch, it was a huge difference. Like they had online problems with Last Epoch because of the sheer volume of people that came in. They had some online bugs with however their online infrastructure worked. They had issues there. I don't think it was a server capacity issue. I think it was more of a bug issue on whatever they had going out there. But the biggest saving grace that this game has is you can play it offline. And Wolcen had that, but Wolcen was also fundamentally broken in a lot of ways. So this game was not broken in a lot of ways. Like I had zero issues playing it. So comparing this to the Wolcen launch, this was so much better. Even though it had online issues, you can play it offline. And the big revelation to me is like a lot of people want an offline version of Path of Exile. And I think this game is going to offer that. Now, it's not necessarily as complex as Path of Exile, but if you could play however often they're going to do cycles, whether it's every few months or however long they're going to do this, when these cycles come out and you can play them offline, I think that is massive. I think that gives you opportunities for stuff like the Steam Deck, or if your internet's out or something like that, you don't have to worry about an outage or slow internet or whatever. You can just play the cycle content offline. And I think that is, if that is true going forward, I think that is going to be massive. Now, it doesn't let you do co-op or anything like that, but I think the offline mode is huge. And it worked out really well for me. I've played entirely offline. I've had zero issues. In fact, you get faster loading times. You don't have to worry about, like, I had this weird Path of Exile thing at 8 o'clock at night. It would just go into this slowdown. Like, it would be really laggy and hard to play. And it was 8 o'clock almost every night, 8:10, 8:15, somewhere in that realm. It would just get horrible to play. None of that's a problem here. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the bank and stash tab system. The stash tab system in this is amazing. You can just go create as many stash tabs as you want. You can create little tabs for it, folders, whatever you want to call them. You can color code them. You got little icons you can put on them. Like, it's very well done system. Love the bank and stash tab system in here. Next up is the audio. I thought the audio itself was very excellent. I really enjoyed this. The hitting creatures and the sound of your skills and everything, I thought was very well done. No clipping. There was nothing that was cut off. There was nothing that was overran by other sounds. Like, there's parts of Path of Exile towards Act 9, at the end of Act 9 or 10 or somewhere in that realm, there's like crowd noises in the background that gets cut out all the time, and it sounds terrible. There's not really any way to fix it, and it's jarring to be, you're immersed in the game playing along, and then audio cuts out. I don't like that. This game was really smooth with the audio. Next up is the help system. This game has one of the finest in-game help systems I think I've ever seen. I've not really partaken much into it, but just glancing at it and looking through it, it looks like it's fairly in-depth and covers a lot of things. Now, this is a much simpler game than Path of Exile. I don't exactly expect a game like Path of Exile to try to explain itself all in the game. Path of Exile is an outlier for a lot of things. I generally love to see all the help guides in the game and not have to go out and browse out. Like I said, Path of Exile is kind of an outlier, but this game does a really good job of explaining itself. I don't recall Grim Dawn being as good of explaining things on this aspect. It's been a while since I've played it. I don't remember if Wolcen was quite as well explained. I don't think the developers of Wolcen understood it very much either. But the help system in Last Epoch is amazing. It looks really good. And if I was going to really dive into the game and try to learn more and more about it, Path of Exile style, it looks like there's a lot of help there. And when I did look stuff up, it was fairly well there and straightforward. So very much enjoyed that. Now, the next one I want to talk about is map navigation. This one kind of rolls into some things we're going to talk about later with the story, but the moving around in the different eras I thought was very cool. You can click on a different era and you can see the map changing and everything. I thought all of that was really cool. I loved it. It very much reminds me of Grim Dawn, which is a very good thing because I really like the map system in Grim Dawn. However, the map system in Grim Dawn is fairly straightforward. You look at a map and there's a bunch of points to go to and you can just browse around. Oh, yeah, it was over in this area. Oh, that town, that one right there. With this one, you got to switch between the different eras. And I've been trying to find certain map spots for videos and things like that. And even just navigating without me recording a video, trying to find something and saying, well, where was that? There's so many different eras to go through and they all kind of blend in the middle or blend together. The couple in the middle before like the desolate times or whatever the end, wherever everything's all destructed. I can't remember the name of it, but there's two, like the divine era, and I don't remember what they are, but the two kind of in the middle were very hard to tell apart, and you have to scroll around and zoom into certain maps, and I don't think you can get back to like certain boss levels. Like some of it's just kind of weird to navigate, and I think they could really stand to either put a search option in or something to make the eras a little bit easier to search through. I just didn't care for navigating the map system. The different eras are cool, like I said, but just trying to go and find a particular place to go to. Like I was trying to figure out where to go talk to the Circle of Fortune people. And I know it's in this, I think it's in this era, but which town was it in? And all the names kind of blend together. It just kind of seems very similar and it's hard to find. So I really think they could improve the map system a lot, the navigating the map system. Next up, I want to talk about the combat system. This is very similar to Diablo 4, except it's the opposite of Diablo 4. So in one of the biggest criticisms I have for Diablo 4, and I only spent 6 hours playing. It was so boring and repetitive. I could not get much past it, but the combat system was horrible. I hated the combat system. You have to generate fury or whatever. I think it's called fury in that game. It's basically mana, just a different colored bubble on the right-hand side. You have no potions. You have no way of regenerating it except using these really piss-poor skills that generate that fury, and then you can unleash that fury every once in a while, every few, it felt like half a minute. It just felt like an eternity before you could use the cool skills, and then you're back using these shitty skills that you just don't like using that didn't feel very good. It dawned on me that the combat system of Last Epoch is exactly the same combat system that Diablo 4 uses, except instead of starting off with an empty tank of fun, you start off with a full tank of fun, and then you generate the tanks of fun as you go. There is no mana potions. You're doing leech or regen or something like that, and the ball fills up as you go. One of the big complaints I had for Diablo 4 is that ball will, once you fill it up and then you get out of combat, it just starts dropping off, and I hated that. I thought that was a terrible concept. With Last Epoch, that stays full and then it regenerates in between fights. So you've got the fun tank ready to go on the next one. And I love that. And it took me a few hours before I realized that the combat system was essentially the same as what Diablo 4 does, except the combat system's fun in this game and very engaging. And I really liked it. So if I was going to give advice to any other game from Last Epoch, I would say the Diablo 4 needs to just copy what Last Epoch does for combat style and make it fun. Don't let that fury gauge go away. Keep that built up. Let it, it can go away as you use the skills, but let it come back easier. I don't know. I just didn't like the way Diablo 4 did its combat system. So if I was going to push something out of Last Epoch, it would be the combat system to Diablo 4. Next up, I want to talk about the story. So there is a story, and like Grim Dawn, it's kind of a forgettable story. Like the Wolcen story, I thought was really good. I kind of remember some of it. You're like, I think you're the child of some king or something, and I don't know, whatever. I don't remember the whole story exactly, but I remember that I enjoyed the story very much in Wolcen, and if I was going to revisit Wolcen, it would be to watch the story and the cutscenes and all of that go through again. I thought that was phenomenal. Grim Dawn had 0 cutscenes, and all the story was told through dialogue and everything like that. And it's basically how Diablo 1 and 2 are. There's not a whole lot of cutscenes in there. It's been so long since I played Diablo 2, I don't remember. But Diablo 1 definitely didn't have very many cutscenes. A lot of the story is told through the level design and the bosses you fight and things like that, like environmental storytelling. And I think Last Epoch does a good job for the most part of doing the environmental storytelling, but the story itself was kind of convoluted, which is typical for your ARPGs, this style of game. But I don't think Last Epoch left me with anything that I remember. I don't really remember a lot of the Grim Dawn boss fights. There's a couple that I remember. So Grim Dawn definitely wasn't as memorable as it probably could have been. I just remember that I really like Grim Dawn, and I want to go back and play it again. And every time they release an expansion or I find out that there's a really cool mod or something, I want to go back to it. Same thing with Last Epoch. I want to go back and play Last Epoch as it keeps going. I see the reason to keep this installed on my hard drive and not ditch it. And every time they do a new cycle or something like that, I would be more than happy to go through the story. And maybe I'll pick more of it up as it goes. But one of the things that I really think this should pick up from Path of Exile is to get more memorable boss fights. I remember the first time I fought Dominus in Path of Exile. I know I've fought him like a million times since then, but the first time that I fought that battle, I remember all the little sub-bosses that come out ahead of Dominus, and then you fight Dominus, and then Dominus gets killed off, and there's this big monster that comes out after that. Like, it's this huge fight. And I don't remember I remember some of the other fights just because I've done them so many times, but like the Mervale fight to start off with was always kind of dicey whether I was going to survive it or not. And of course, everybody remembers Katava as you go, but like some of those little miniature bosses, I just remember the fights because the first time I fought him, I was like, this is really cool. I don't really think there was any of that in Last Epoch. The Lagan fight is cool, but it's more memorable because it's tedious and his voice acting is terrible. Like, I don't remember a lot of the final boss in Last Epoch was amazing. I thought that was a killer boss fight. They used almost every different kind of damage in the game. I really liked that a lot. But aside from the Lagan fight being terrible voice acting and the final boss being really cool, I don't remember any of the other bosses. Maybe the first mini boss I fought because I died to it a few times. But other than that, there's just nothing memorable. And I really think they need to take the ideas from Path of Exile and put some more memorable boss fights in there. The acts kind of blend together. The story kind of blends together. You kind of go back and forth between the different eras, which is cool, but it seems like one act should be all this era and another act should be all that era or something like that. And you kind of go back and forth and you get lost and you just kind of, I didn't really care for it all that much. The story needs to be improved in some way, put some memorable boss fights in there, do some really cool stuff. I did see some people complaining that they thought the story just ended at the end of the monoliths. And when I got to I thought, okay, we're going to get blue balled on some big boss fight. And then we have this massive boss fight. And then they basically tell you the story continues on in the monoliths. And I thought, that's cool. I enjoyed the way they ended the story. There was a massive boss fight. And then they tell you go chase everything in the monolith. So I was okay with the way the story ended. I didn't have a problem with that. The cutscenes for this, they weren't animated, but they had these kind of cartoony still image sort of things that had like clouds or something moving in the background. Like they weren't animated, but they had some moving portion to it. I kind of like the way they did this. It's more budget friendly, like it's cheaper. It's not really full animated, all that kind of stuff. But it was miles better than Grim Dawn. Grim Dawn had 0 cutscenes. I think they may have just had flat images, if anything, or they just said some words and moved on. So I really liked the way they did the transitions between acts and stuff and whatever cutscenes they did have. I did like that on here. The level design for each map and all the things that you went through, I thought were pretty cool. For the most part, some of them got a little bit, whatever that dead section is that you go through, it's like the 3rd or 4th epoch that you're in, where everything's just kind of desolate and dead. I liked the design of it, but some of that went on for too long. It was just kind of boring, and some of the other levels might have been longer, but they had more interesting stuff in the background, so they didn't seem as long, if that makes sense. So I did like how some of the maps had depth to them. Like you get into the one forest area, I think it was a forest area, and there are caves or something. There's that big giant thing walking in the background that reminded me of something from Gears of War. I liked that. I thought that was cool. But then there were other levels that had some 3D depth to them that seemed like they were too deep, too far. Like you're in some massive cave that's the size of the world or something. Like some of it just felt a little bit too big. So a little bit absurdly far away maybe or something like that. I don't know. Tightening that up might be kind of cool, although this is like a total nitpick. And the biggest compliment that I can give this game is that I can nitpick little stupid things and not yell about, skills being broken like Wolcen had. Like Wolcen had way bigger technical issues at the stage that this game is in right now. And this game has 0 technical issues aside from the launch problems. Aside from the networking issues at the very beginning, this game is pretty much plays fairly well. So I can complain about the story. I can complain about the level design and stuff like that. This is a good place to be. Let me just say that it's a good place to be. The one complaint that I do have about the level design is they try to do a 3D, you've got ramps and stuff up. Sometimes you'd shoot something and it would hit the ramp or it hit something around the area and it wouldn't go over and hit the monster. Now, Path of Exile, as I've been playing through Path of Exile again, I noticed they do have some ramps and some elevation changes. This game really exaggerated, and it feels like you're hitting things where the enemy's shooting down into you, and you're shooting up at them, but you can't hit them while they can hit you. So I'd like to see that smoothed out a little bit. That was kind of annoying. And the final thing on the story is, again, with the voice acting. As I am playing through Diablo 1 again, and Diablo 1 has some amazing voice acting. It has some amazing music. Like it just really well done all the way around with all of the audio. The music in this game I thought was really good, but I don't think the music fits a lot of what's going on. At no point in time while I'm playing through the original Diablo did I feel like the music was out of place. In fact, it all put me into the mood that the level's on, the fights that I'm doing, whatever it was. It's hard to describe the Diablo 1 music. It's all kind of mellow, mystical kind of stuff, maybe. But it's a damp, dark dungeon music kind of sound. Some of the stuff in this game just sounded like they put, oh, all right, we're going to go buy that track and just put it there. You know, it didn't really fit the levels that you were in necessarily, or the towns you were in or something like that. So voice acting was kind of the music was good, but it didn't seem fitting. So I'd like to see the music improved a little bit and definitely get the better voice acting. I mean, the Lagan fight is memorable because of how dopey he sounds. But there's a lot of the acting just sounds like some dude rolled up and said, all right, and then just started talking into the microphone and walked away. Not like they actually prepared to give a feeling experience or something like that. I don't know. Didn't really do it for me. So I'd like to see that improved. Next up, let's talk about builds in this game. I had an absolute blast trying out every different build. And I tried 3 or 4 of the different builds. I don't remember. There's a couple of them that I didn't try. And there's always something else that I was looking at. I'm like, man, that'd be cool. There's so many directions you can take each one, because each character class has 3 ascendancies, whatever they call them in this game. It's ascendancies in Path of Exile. So not only can you go into those 3 ascendancies, you can also put points into other ascendancies you didn't go into. So there is an enormous amount of configuration you can do. I'm not a person that likes following build guides. In fact, I was very reluctant to do that in Path of Exile, but Path of Exile is a lot different experience. At some point, you will need to follow a build guide. It is good, in my opinion, to go and do your own thing for a while. I will stand on that hill and I will die on that hill. I prefer, and maybe this is just a preference thing, but I prefer doing my own thing first, learning what doesn't work, and then if I, maybe down the road, I could see myself trying to not necessarily follow a build guide, but just look at what people do in this game to see how I could improve my stuff. That's where I'm more interested in it, is doing my own thing first and then looking at what somebody else does. I hate following somebody else's stuff because I don't want to follow the meta or whatever's the most optimal thing is. I want to do something that I enjoy and have fun with, and part of the fun that I have is rolling my own build. And getting back to the whole help system they have a very fantastic system that shows what DPS that skill's using. I don't necessarily need my character DPS, although it'd be cool to have a dummy or something you can go and see what damage, whatever. But there are plenty of tools in this game to help you select the passives that you want to use, the skills you want to use, and there's so much variety in the build style that you can do that even in your skill choice, your passive choice, let alone all the different skills you can do and all the different combinations of skill trees and everything in the skills. I love how much this is. The passive trees are very cool. I haven't found anything that didn't seem to work. It doesn't seem like they have massive bug fixes for huge problems, and maybe there's some OP builds or something. It is what it is. They'll fix all this stuff over time. They'll balance everything. It's good. Again, this game is in so much better a place than Wilson was at the same time. And I don't think Wilson's fixed half the problems that they had, but gear-wise, I thought the gear was really good. The crafting system in this is really good. I loved all of it. The loot filtering system was really good. I went out and grabbed a couple of different loot filters. I didn't feel like dealing with it, but the fact that you have a loot filter built in that just lets you create your own. Path of Exile has a loot filter system, and it's kind of easier just to go to a text editor and edit it there. There is a website you can go to that somebody's created. It's not from the Path of Exile developers. It's somebody else that created it, where you can go create loot filters and all that stuff. But I find it just easier to go to a text editor. With this game, it seems pretty straightforward to go into the editor and just go do the thing you need to do. So I think that's a very strong positive for this game. And again, every build that I've tried, and I'll have throughout this video, I will have showed some of the builds that I've used, but they're not the be all end all. You can take the same class and start a different build and do different things. Like I did a ranged build. I think I did a ranged, a magic, and like your classic builds, ranged, magic, and melee. But there's so many different combinations of stuff out there. I really love the variety and depth that you have with the builds that you can do. Let's talk about the end game now. Typically, in games like this, or like Diablo used to have ladders, whatever that meant, I never really got into it, never cared, never tried. Wilson tried to have some kind of end game. I tested it for a little bit. Basically, the Wolsten in-game was pretty much the monolith system. In here, you go into it, you run a few maps, and then I got bored. I honestly get bored of in-game. So when I tried Path of Exile out, I never really expected to ever play beyond one league. First of all, I never expected to play beyond beating the campaign. I'm used to games like Grim Dawn, Diablo, stuff like that. You go through the campaign, you're done with it, that's it. Maybe you go grind out some gear to play it on harder difficulty or something like that. And I think that's probably what the draw for Diablo 1 and 2 was, is you'd play it on harder difficulties. Like, you didn't just play the same game over and over and over and over and over again. You played it on harder difficulties, and you got better gear as you went through. So it didn't get, even though it was repetitious and you were going through the same stuff over and over again, it didn't feel like it because you were getting better gear. You were fighting harder monsters. It was more challenge as you went. Something like Grim Dawn, you play through it. I don't remember if there's any difficulties or not, but when you beat Grim Dawn, there's 2 or 3 DLCs. They got another DLC coming out this year. Wolsten had what they tried to do with an in-game, but you basically beat the campaign and you're pretty much done with it. The end game in Wolsten was pretty much just like the monolith system here, and I got just as bored with the Wolsten in-game as I did with this one. I tried the Wolsten in-game out one night, and then I never went back. You basically load into maps that look like levels from the campaign, and then you just kind of run through those, kill a boss or whatever it was, then you're done. But the bosses weren't memorable. You're just grinding gear. You're grinding through the same stuff over and over again. And the reason I mention that is because the monolith system, I did 1 or maybe 2 monoliths, and I was like, this is the entire monolith system right here. It's going to be this repetitious crap constantly, and I'm done. I did not bother getting into the more difficult corruption. Maybe there were some cool boss fights. I don't know. But it just felt very same. And I kind of dipped out of it. I'm done. That's why I ended up quitting playing, because it just wasn't anything there to do. I'd love to see one of the big draws to Path of Exile. And I'm not saying I want Last Epoch to be Path of Exile. I want Last Epoch to take some concepts from Path of Exile and apply those. The concept of having stuff like Delve and Heist and the Abyss and stuff like that. You've got things that are, they kind of have, if you want to look at Path of Exile's Delve and Heist, similar to the dungeon system in this game, sure. I tried one dungeon, it looked like all the other campaign maps, and I've never gone back. So I really didn't give the dungeons much of a chance, and I really didn't give the monoliths much of a chance, but they looked very samey, and they didn't look like they were going to alter any content. With Path of Exile, quite honestly, if I had to do maps over and over and over and over again, and that's all I ever did, I would not play very long. I would get my Atlas tree filled out, I would get all my maps, nodes on the Atlas map filled out, and I'd be done. The reason I keep coming back, and the reason I come back league after league, and probably many other people, is because there's a huge variety of content. Like last league, the last couple of leagues I've played, I focused a lot on Delve. This next league, I've got plans to go into Heist and do different things. There's so much different content. You can take your build, you can challenge that build in the mapping or monolith section, whatever you want to call it, and then you've got bosses to fight after that. Each map has its own boss. Like, I think that's where the monolith system really lags behind. There was, I don't know, you go fight a boss, you get ambushed or something, and then you gotta, I don't know, go click on something and defeat a bunch of hordes or whatever. Like, there was only 3 or 4 different variations of the style, and it just got old. They were fast, so I jump in, I do a few monoliths, and I'm like, all right, cool. I feel like I've played a whole night, and I've only played 20 minutes. So I just really didn't like the monolith system, and that's the biggest thing that killed Diablo 4 for me. Every time I'd go into one of those cellars, I did 4 or 5 cellars, maybe 3 or 4, I don't remember. It wasn't very many. But every time I went into one of those cellars, there'd be somebody down at the bottom. Some chick had come up, some village chick or something. Oh no, the monsters are going to attack. And the first time it was cool. You got a horde of monsters that come up, a bunch of zombies come up out of the ground. The 4th or 5th time you do that, you're like, all right, I'm never going in a cellar again. And you skip the overworld. That's the biggest problem I had with Diablo 4 is how much repetition there was. I don't mind grinding for something as long as I think there's a payoff. And I looked at the entirety of Diablo 4 and I thought, this is all of Diablo 4 wrapped up in this cellar system is just doing the same thing. And I could see people talking about grinding nightmare dungeons and stuff like that. That entire game just felt completely repetitive, copy paste every bit of content throughout. It never felt different. No matter where I went in the open world, it all felt the same. With Last Epoch, the campaign all felt different. Everything was cool. It's just the monolith section got really repetitive. I love the concept of being able to focus or target farm certain content, whether you want swords or shields or XP books or idols or whatever it was you were going to go. I thought that was really cool. But they need better content that's not repetitive and boring behind it, because that turned me off instantly and I'm done. I don't have the patience to sit down and mess around with that kind of content for hours and hours and days and days. I'm out. I'm done. I want different content than monoliths and dungeons and whatever. The blessing system looks really cool. I was really excited to engage in that, and then it was just in monoliths, and I got sick of dealing with the monoliths. And same thing with the Circle of Fortune. I think the Circle of Fortune should come up sooner. One of the best things that Path of Exile does is gives you content throughout. You get end game content throughout the campaign. So you get Einhar in Act 2? I think you get Einhar in like Act 2, and then you start getting the Aztec chick, whatever, I can't remember her name, whatever that content is, where you're starting to go into the temples and stuff like that. Like you get that in Act 7. So there's one of the things I'd love to see Last Epoch take a concept from Path of Exile is spreading out the end game content throughout the campaign. I would love to see, I thought Circle of Fortune came so late in the game, I didn't care about interacting with it anymore. By the time I got to the end game and the monoliths, I was done. And that's when you get Circle of Fortune. So I'd love to see that far sooner in the game, maybe a couple acts, even 1 or 2 acts sooner in the campaign. Give me that Circle of Fortune stuff a lot quicker, even earlier on, maybe Act 2, 3, something like that. Let me have that as a thing to do, something more to do. It just needs more. So for the end game, for me, you kind of go through the campaign and then you get end game. I'd like to see the end game sprinkled through more, like Path of Exile does. Like I said, you get Einhar missions very early on. You're interacting with a lot of the end game content, and then when you do get to the end game, you get more end game content. So I'd like to see that kind of a concept spun into Last Epoch. How replayable is Last Epoch? Well, I very much enjoyed trying new builds out, but as we just talked about, I really didn't like the end game. I think the end game needs a lot of work. They need a lot more content and stuff like that. But I do see myself playing Last Epoch for many years to come. I think this has got a really good foundation to the game, and I definitely want to come back and play this. I don't need it to be Path of Exile complicated or deep or anything like that, but I do want to see reasons to keep coming back. Like if they release new content, I'm going to be happy to come back. I could see myself trying new builds out and stuff like that, but just to play builds, I don't think is the replayability factor. The replayability factor is trying new builds on new content. Every time I could see myself, every time they release new content, new cycle or something like that, I would try 1 or 2 or 5 different builds. The biggest, strongest thing that this game has going for its replayability is the diversity in builds you can do and the different things you can have there. What it needs is the content behind it to keep that going. So in closing, this is probably as simple of an ARPG as I would like to see one get. I think this game has a very good introduction. It's a very good introductory ARPG into this kind of game. I think Diablo 4 is a little bit too mobile. It's more of a mobile game. I think it's far too simple. I liken Diablo 4 more to Minecraft Dungeons. It is like preschool level gaming of this style of game. I think it's too simple. For my taste, it's too simple, too repetitive. It's definitely not for me. Let's just say that. I'll just say it's not for me. I think Last Epoch and Grim Dawn, and even to an extent, say Wolcen or something like that, these are very good games. This is probably a little less complex than Grim Dawn. Grim Dawn's got its own quirks to it. This is a game that I would definitely recommend to people that were interested in it. Like if you really liked Diablo 4 and wanted to see where the genre could go, Last Epoch's the way to do it. Grim Dawn would have been probably something I would have recommended in the past, but it's a little older. It's a little bit, there's a little bit more demanding to it. I think this game's Last Epoch's definitely got a lot better user-friendly experience than Grim Dawn does. So Last Epoch would be like the bare minimum entry into this. And then from there, you go to Grim Dawn, you go to Path of Exile, stuff like that. This is a good gateway drug, if you want to call it that. It's a good entry level to the rest of what this offers. So I've said it before in one of my other videos, I gave this an 8 out of 10. I stand by that. I think this is a very excellent game. It's got a very excellent foundation to it. And where Path of Exile's at the end of its 10-year run and about to unleash Path of Exile 2, this game is starting its 10-year run. And I think it's got a brilliant future in front of it compared to, say, something like Diablo 4, where it's a very corporately driven game that you can tell they're putting in the minimum viable effort to make people come back and play it. Reskinning zombies, reskinning content. I don't think that's how Last Epoch's going to go. And I'm definitely excited to see where they take it. Now, maybe they take it and shoot it into the ground. Who knows? But the sky's the limit with this game. It's got a very good foundation and it can only get better from here. So anyway, that will do it for this video. We will catch you on the next one. Take care.